Welcome to the St. Thomas More Lynchburg's Homily Podcast. We join Father John Christian as he brings his insight and application to the readings for the 19th Sunday in Ordinary Time.
As a matter of prudence and probably as a bit of a survival mechanism, we human beings, for the most part, with some exceptions, tend to be somewhat risk-averse. We don't typically seek out trial and tribulation. For the most part, we often bend many of our energies towards avoiding such things, looking for that path of least resistance or that easiest way, that most efficient way, that safest way. I mean, nobody needs to needlessly put themselves in harm's way. Yet, that being said, we express many sentiments that are of a contradictory notion. We often say things like, well, nothing ventured, nothing gained. And so therein we recognize that there does seem to be a choice. There's kind of a safe complacency or a bold adventurism. And so we find ourselves, for the most part, again, in this life, oftentimes caught between these things. But yet, as people of faith, we know that indeed, while it is important to be prudent, to a certain extent, we have to be bold. We have to make certain leaps of faith. Just recently, I was watching an old documentary or a recorded interview with Mother Angelica talking about the early days of getting EWTN up and running. And so at first, of course, initially we're familiar with her and her great work, but she didn't have anything. This sister down in Alabama trying to create the Eternal Word television network didn't have two pennies to rub together and yet had this grand idea. And so she got a line on some broadcast equipment that she would need to get this studio up and running. And the quote that was given to her was $600,000. Think of that all the way back then. That's still a lot now. And so, of course, she didn't have any of this. And so, like most of us, there is this thought of, well, I can't really initiate this. I can't start this. How can I enter into this undertaking if I'm not ready? If I don't have everything in order, if I don't have the funds, if I don't have the pieces or the parts, it's too risky. But she made that great observation that I have found to be absolutely true in the spiritual life and in life in general, is that we never really get the guidance or the confirmation or the correction from God that we seek until we've made a decision. We can sit on the fence the entirety of our lives. God isn't going to push us off it one way or the other. We have to, at a certain point, make the decision to go forward. And then, God willing, it'll either be corrected or confirmed. And so Mother Angelica, coming to this conclusion, realized, I'll just go ahead and put in that order for this equipment. Deus providet. God will provide, God willing. And the very next day, someone, a man in the Bahamas of all places, had read one of her books. While I can't remember the full story, but it had been a life-changing experience for him. And so he called her up and said, this book helped me and I want to get it to more people. What can I do to assist you in all of your efforts? And of course, in classic Mother Angelica fashion, she's like, well, you could write me a check for $600,000. And apparently, according to the story, he said, it's in the mail. And Eternal Word television network was up and running. And so her story, that wonderful anecdote about how her great dream came to be, it's important for us to remember the same thing. We have to, at a certain point, choose. We have to decide. We have to step out of the boat, because the trials and tribulations that for the most part we don't want, but we can't let our desire to be free of them dictate how we live our life, because they are going to come no matter what. The boat is going to be tossed on the storm-tossed waves of life. That's just how it's going to be. Even when you look at those lives that people might have that seem like they've got it all together and everything's going fine, their waves are just the kind you can't see. Nobody gets through this thing without being on that storm-tossed sea at some point, some even more than others. It will be there. We cannot escape them. But what we can do is face them, and face them in that right perspective. For on the other side of those waves is, of course, nothing less than our Lord Jesus Christ issuing that same instruction that he gave to Peter to us. Come. He calls us to come to himself. And so Peter, in his act of faith, steps out of the relative safety of the boat and begins to walk on that water in faith towards our Lord, and doesn't begin to sink until, of course, that faith wanes. And so when we look at these trials and tribulations and this lack of faith on Peter's part, it isn't just a failure, it's a lesson. For our Lord, again, sent these disciples out into the middle of that sea. He knew there'd be that storm, and he let this befall them that they might indeed learn. And so it's important for us to always remember that theological distinction between God's permissive will and his voluntary will. That is, what he permits to happen versus what he wills or causes to happen. For God never indeed causes bad things. The trials and tribulations that we face in life, death, hardship, work issues, house issues, whatever it is, these things aren't caused, but they are permitted to happen that a greater good may come of them. The lukewarm Christian, when faced with hardship, just responds in anger at God. Why are you doing this to me? Not holding that full perspective, realizing that everything that befalls us, as difficult as it may be, can ultimately lead to our sanctification if we keep that right perspective, if we keep our eyes fixed on the one who's calling us to come unto him. Peter gets frightened when he sees how tall the waves are. He loses his focus on Jesus and then begins to sink. But then in his faith, of course, he calls out, "Lord, save me." And the gospel uses that word, and immediately Jesus stretched out his hand and caught him. And so we as people of faith then are called to take that as our own inspiration and to set out boldly in faith and keep our eyes fixed on the one who is calling us to come to himself at the conclusion of this life, to not get caught standing in the trough of those waves and all of a sudden becoming horrified at how high they are, but instead to keep our eyes fixed on our Lord Jesus Christ, to make that decision to follow him in faith, come what may. It's a hard thing to do, but it's what our Lord calls us to and what he sustains us in. For it's the only way that we can even begin to navigate the tumultuous nature of this life, is by recognizing that on the other side of all of this is the person of our Lord Jesus Christ saying to us, "Come."
Thank you for tuning in to the St. Thomas More Lynchburg's Homily Podcast. For the daily reading and to learn more about the community of St. Thomas More, please visit our website at www.stmva.org. If you were blessed by our podcast today, please give it a like, a kind review, and share it with a friend. God bless.